You're listening to Advice from Your Advocates, a show where we provide elder law advice to professionals who work with the elderly and their families.
Welcome back to Advice from Your Advocates. I'm Bob Mannor. I'm a certified elder law attorney in Michigan, and we have a really interesting guest today, Lance A. Slatton. He's an influencer in the long-term care industry, and welcome, Lance.
Thank you for having me, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and so people can get more information about you at lanceaslatton.com. Okay, so it's Lance A, SLATTON.com. And tell us a little bit about your work. I know you have some regional work, and then you do some social media and online education. Sure. So tell us about both of those things.
Yeah, so, without going too far into my personal story right now, my wife and I, we were newlyweds, and she had already graduated with her career and degree, and I was pursuing medical school. And we got a phone call one evening that my father, unbeknownst to us, was recovering from some pretty serious surgery, and the home health nurse didn't think he could live on his own. The choices were either going into a short or long-term care rehab facility or come live with us. And I like to think most families, if they're able, they would choose the latter and have them come live with them for a while during their recovery. And my wife and I had no idea what we were getting into. I quickly came to the realization, if we're going through something like this, and this was 2.5 years of 24/7 care, there's got to be countless other people out there experiencing the same things. And what really had stood out to us was we had one of the best healthcare systems in the world. And now we're both in Michigan, right, Bob? So we'll leave that one there. And never once were we ever offered resources or put into contact with any sort of support services. And it was only when I went to have lunch with a friend of mine that there was a home healthcare company hiring, and I was asking them questions, and they knew nothing about what they were hiring for or anything. I left that lunch with my friend, called my wife, and said, you know what, there's got to be a way where we could send people into the home to help families going through what we're going through, because I'm sure there's countless others out there. And unbeknownst to us, there's an entire, industry already existing, but we didn't know that because no one in our healthcare community during my father's recovery and procedures ever made us aware of that. And so we started our company.
Let me be clear, because I want to make sure that the audience I understand. It's basically saying going in and providing some advocacy and some clarity for families going through this.
Well, it's that and a lot more. It's also providing help with their ADLs, their activities of daily living, the bathing, grooming, toileting, dressing, helping them with medication reminders.
Hands-on care then.
Hands-on care. Everything below requiring a licensed healthcare professional. Right. So like with my father's situation, we had home healthcare. Medicare will pay for that up to 9 weeks at a time. Work home care, Medicare does not cover those services in any state because, as your viewers and listeners may be aware, Medicare is federally regulated. Medicaid is a state-by-state regulation, and Medicare does not cover those types of, they call them non-skilled services. And so we didn't realize there was services out there like that. So we decided to start a company. We've been in business now for almost 14 years. Last 7, we've been the #1 rated company in Michigan. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way. I say that because we got into this from a very personal experience, a very difficult time, emotionally, physically, financially, trying to support my father, and we wanted to help other families. And so that created our company. But as a result of our company, we would go over all the counties in southeastern Michigan, facilitating caregiver support groups, doing educational talks. I had multiple semi-trailers full of medical equipment and supplies that we would just give to people, that churches and senior centers and even some of our prisons would donate to a senior center because they didn't need them. They would donate it to us because they're not in the business of really providing support like that for their participants and their members. And that went on for about 7+ years. Well, then COVID rears its head, and we made the decision before the governor made the decision for us that, we're going to stop public gathering because of this virus. And it started as, a 2-week deal, and then it was another 2 weeks. So during that time, I'm trying to figure out a way, how can, other than providing our staff into these homes, people that hire us, how can we still do this goodwill, we called it a ministry, way of supporting families and giving them these resources. I heard a podcast one evening, and I'll be the first to admit, knew nothing about what podcasts were. I literally thought they were like your network TV shows and news, just taking the audio and putting it out there for digesting. not realizing anybody could have a podcast. Well, I happened to hear a couple of gentlemen who had a home care company, so that caught my interest. And it was really awful quality. It sounded like people were talking in a bathroom. There was echoes. You could hear kids screaming in the background. And that evening I went home and told my wife, I said, you know what? We need to start a podcast. Well, her first question to me is, what do you know about podcasts? I said, absolutely nothing. So spent several months researching what podcasts were. Is there space for us in this area? And we quickly discovered, yeah, there's plenty of room. And so we launched All Home Care Matters in May of 2020. And it's been kind of a whirlwind ever since then.
So the name of your podcast is All Home Care Matters?
Yes, All Home Care Matters.
Okay. And what's the name of the home care company that you...
Enriched Life Home Care Services.
Okay. And you service Southeastern Michigan?
Southeastern Michigan.
Okay. So is my understanding that's a company that you started yourself, or did you have some partners in that?
No, it's a family-owned business, family-owned and operated, except for, the majority of the staff are, hired staff, but it is a family company. We've had several offers over the past few years to, license our name and stuff, but we're just not really in the mindset right now that we want to give up that name, just because when you build something from the ground up and, you build a great reputation, you're very protective of that reputation. And it's not to say in the future we wouldn't revisit that, but at this time it's just solely owned and operated by our family.
Now, hopefully a lot of this is behind us, but I'm always curious about how people, especially people in the long-term care industry and particularly the home care industry, got through that COVID process. So how were you able to continue to service your clients, your families in that setting where everybody was pretty much afraid to have physical interaction?
Sure. And that's a great question. And sometimes people raise their eyebrows when I give the answer I'm about to give. It didn't really affect us that much. And what I mean by that is, when you're dealing with somebody going through chemo or radiation, they already have a weakened immune system. So for us, that means our staff are going to go in there, make sure they don't have a cold, they don't have a fever, they don't have a cough. When they're doing personal one-on-one, hands-on interaction, they're wearing a face mask and they're wearing gloves. We were already equipped for all of that. When people were making a mad run on, buying masks and finding masks, we have a second building in our company, and that's all of our supplies and, equipment, if you will. So we were already well prepared and equipped for it. And we were already practicing those, PPE, personal protection equipment practices really before COVID ever hit. The difference for us was, we're a lot more mindful if a staff isn't feeling good, and maybe they're just taking care of a sweet gentleman or a sweet lady who doesn't have necessarily a weakened immune system, but now you have to take that extra step and treat them as though they do. Because here's the thing is, I'm sure you guys are aware, with COVID, I might have went to pick something up at the drugstore, not realizing I came into contact with somebody with COVID because they didn't know they had it. And now I'm going in to take care of an elderly person or even a child, whatever the person may be. I might be transmitting that virus unbeknownst to me. So we're taking a lot more precautions. Every home was equipped with gallons of hand sanitizer, boxes of masks, boxes of gloves.
I know that some of the home care agencies that we deal with locally here, especially the family-owned ones, not the franchises, were having staffing issues at the time. How did you deal with staffing issues and making sure that you could service your clients?
Thankfully, I can tell you this, we lost one employee only during the entirety of COVID, and it was voluntarily. They were in their mid-60s. Their family became very, very concerned. And I don't begrudge them this. I don't judge them for this. But I would say it was probably a little more than necessary, if you will. And they were more concerned about their mom and their grandma going into a home and contracting COVID rather than, mom or grandma being out in the public doing her grocery shopping, getting her gas and contracting COVID. But I know companies here locally where we were hired in place of another company because the staff, they would tell the family, literally, we have zero staff. They have all quit or they've all stepped down. We count ourselves very, very fortunate that we did not have that issue during COVID.
So tell us a little bit more about your social media presence and how that, I know that you started telling us about how that came about, but now tell us a little bit more about what you're doing on social media, your podcast and things like that, and how that's really advanced things and helped people.
Yeah, that really happened by pure accident. It was never intentional. I literally, like I said, I shared how I came up with the idea, and it was really a temporary thing for the meantime. Because again, when you're going out to, 6, 7, 10 different communities during the week, doing your support groups, educational talks and fun activities and, oldies concerts, all that's taken away. And that's really where I get my joy. I just love interacting with people and either giving them a smile or giving them helpful information. And we needed to find a way for me to continue doing that during COVID. So the solution was a podcast really designed just for a month at the most. And then, that couple of weeks, that month turned into almost 3 years. So it really let us hone in on the craft of the show and improve it and make changes, what worked, what didn't. I got more comfortable. I never wanted to be in front of a camera or a microphone. That wasn't my thing. I wanted to just help people. That's why I was going to go to medical school. And we, about 6, 7 months into the show, one of the major news outlets had reached out and said, we got, you got our attention. Tell us what you're doing. I knew nothing, Bob, about YouTube subscribers. Didn't know, like we got our silver creator award from YouTube. Didn't even know that was a thing. Didn't know any of this stuff. So they did a really great article about us. Next thing we know, like we're going from 50,000 subscribers to 60 to 70. It's been such a fast acceleration that we never really had adjusted for or planned for. It just has kind of happens really organically. But the greatest thing about it is I said, okay, this is a great way. We're not just helping our local communities here in Michigan. Now we're helping people in Alaska, Texas, Florida, the UK, Australia, Asia, India. It's been remarkable to just kind of sit in the middle and watch it. So that's been very rewarding. And one of my passions is writing. And because of the heightened awareness to our brand and our show, it led to opportunities for me to now, write for several different news platforms, monthly articles. And then I finally forced myself to sit down and write my book. And the book, really, I don't promote it much. I don't market it. We don't really brand it all that much. The purpose of the book is something I wish I had back when I first started helping take care of my dad. Because like I said, we never got those resources. We never were asked, how can we help you? What can we do for you? Have you guys thought about this? Did you know about that? And so I wanted to kind of write a book that, regardless of where you're at in your caregiving journey, whether you're at the beginning, the middle, or towards the end, there's something applicable in there for anyone throughout whatever stage of caregiving they're in. And I really, like I said, I wrote it in the lens of what I wish I had back then that I didn't have.
So is there a particular type of audience or families that you find that you're working with mostly? I'll give you an example of what I mean by the questions. A few years ago, we were looking at our clientele and those that we help. We help people find, get, and pay for good long-term care. But what we noticed was a good 75% of the people that we help was someone that had some dementia, Alzheimer's, or memory issues. And I'm curious as to if that's what you're finding with your home care options, or if there's really a whole different kind of approach or typical client that you see.
If I had to say the most common, it would be, a cognitive degenerative disease, whether it's dementia or what have you. But I wouldn't say it's the majority, but it's the most common. And what I mean by that is we might have an elderly person who no longer can drive because maybe the glaucoma is preventing them from safely driving and they got the keys taken away, but the son lives in Ohio and the daughter is working full time for a law firm. They need mom to be able to get to her appointments, make sure mom's seeing her medications correctly, things like that. But then we also have really an unspoken group of people that often isn't really considered, and that's children with disabilities. There's wonderful state assistance for that, but also finding the help that's going to work right for you, work out best, is rather difficult for families. At least they tell us. Sometimes they age out of those programs, but their needs haven't aged out. They still have the same needs, if not greater. So, it's really a range of, needs and, illnesses. And abilities or lack thereof, I tell people all the time, home care isn't just for seniors. We've sadly had people in their late 30s who had a very aggressive form of breast cancer, or, a gentleman who was working at GM and got hit in the head severely and it caused a brain injury. There's all car accidents, there's all sorts of things that really prevent people from being able to live safely on their own or without some extra assistance.
Can you share with us some of the insight that you help with families with? So I know you've had this podcast. Is it mostly YouTube is your primary source, or are you on other social media also?
Yeah, so we're on all the the usual suspects: Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, Facebook, and YouTube. And then what we do, so like let's say we were interviewing you right now, Bob, we would take the video of you and then we would put it up on YouTube. But then our team would strip the audio down, so you have the audio version, and then they would distribute it out through all of the podcast streaming platforms. So any episode is digestible on any platform.
What do you find is some of the key insights that you are able to share through your podcast, through social media, that is very helpful to families? I agree with you. It's a really nice thing to be able to reach out to anywhere, someone in Alaska that might not have those resources. So what are some insights that you think are most important to share with families?
My personal, and it may not be the right one, because I don't know if there's a direct, right, correct answer. I think there's a lot of different ways to, make potatoes. But for me, it's families knowing that they're not alone. That is probably the loudest and biggest common thread, whether it was our caregiver support groups we facilitate, or, people reaching out to us on the show, or families we encounter that we're helping. They don't know that all these resources are out there. They don't know that there's other people going through similar situations, and they take great pride in equipping them with as much information and resources as they probably can handle, and probably more than they even want. But I don't want them to ever feel like, you know what, I'm the only one going through this. If I have a second, I could give you an example of that.
That'd be great.
So one of our caregiver support groups that we were facilitating, there was a woman that came in, first time visitor. And now I was not the one facilitating this group. I was facilitating another one. And she came in, just sat there, probably middle-aged, not maybe more than 55. And she sat there the entire time. And, she had Kleenex, wiped her eyes and, thanked us. And then she did come back to the following meeting, which is encouraging. And that meeting, she was very inconsolable, very upset. And she decided, you know what, I'm going to share what's going on when they asked her. And we don't want ever to make somebody feel like they're being pressured or must talk. This
Right.
is just for you to absorb if that's what works best for you. And she said, my best friend and her husband, and this goes back, now I said she's like in her mid 50s. They were kids all the way through elementary, middle school, high school sweethearts, best friends. It was a couple best friends. And she basically told me we're not friends anymore. And she thought I was too good for her, didn't have time for her. I mean, all this just really horrible stuff. And, our advice to her was, and now this woman was taking care of a husband who had been newly diagnosed with dementia. And I tell people, usually once you get a diagnosis, you've probably been dealing with it for a couple, 2-3 years before you really realize it was dementia. And it's basically, don't begrudge your friend, right?
Yeah.
As easy as that is for us to sit here and say, because it's not our friendship that's getting ended.
Right.
Your friend hasn't gone through this. She has no idea what you're going through. Thankfully and hopefully her husband isn't and never will have to go through it, or she'll never have to go through it herself. She can't appreciate the shoes you're walking in right now. And the recommendation we give to people, sometimes it's hard to have a face-to-face conversation. Sometimes it's hard to have a telephone call. People can say things that they may not say in person on a phone call, and they may not want to talk to you face-to-face. Sit down and write a letter explaining to her what it is you're dealing with daily. You can't go to the dinner and movie this Friday because, your husband is incontinent and he's, inappropriate. Not his own fault. It's the disease, not him. She's trying to spare him, his integrity.
Yeah.
But she's also trying to spare you and your husband from the public embarrassment and what might transpire, because she doesn't know day to day what's going to happen. And, that did help her, and hopefully, they're friends now, but people that don't go through it don't understand what they're going through.
No, that's very true, and it's very I think it's very difficult. We had a guest on our podcast recently. He talked about so many families tend to he called it cocoon. So
Yeah.
once we have this situation, there might be lots of resources out there, and they might be different. My mother had Alzheimer's, and I remember the last time we probably took her out to dinner, and a lot of the family wasn't really acknowledging the issue yet. And so, but it seemed quite obvious as far as her inability to order a meal or really interact in a fashion that the family or the waitress or anybody would have expected on that. And so sometimes you have to shift, and it might not be that you go out to the Olive Garden, but it might be that, there are resources out there for families, because cocooning into the house where you just never leave the house, that frankly probably makes it worse. Now, the gentleman that we had on our podcast, his company offered therapy services for families with forms of dementia and neurodegenerative diseases. And so his point was there's lots of resources out there, but a lot of families are just so uncertain of that and aren't aware of the resources that might be out there. They tend to just kind of lock the door and hide in their house, not seek outside resources, not interact with friends that they've interacted with before. And it sounds like that's kind of one of the things that you help people understand is, well, it might not be going out to dinner anymore in the same kind of settings. There's still options and opportunities to go out in the community and not just kind of cocoon yourself into your house and not go out into the community or seek resources.
Yeah. The one word we always tell families, adapt, adapt to what the situation calls for, related, but not necessarily directly related, and be in their reality. We had a woman lost her husband of, 70 years, I think. And every day she's going around the house looking for her. And the kids would say, Mom, Dad died, and one of her older kids had passed also. Mom, Joey's died. That's not serving anybody's benefit.
Right.
If Mom is looking for him, he's at work still. That little white lie is going to spare her maybe from having a very dramatic emotional breakdown, an episode, and it might change her whole entire day, which then in turn is not going to help the family. But just adapt to what the situation calls for. It's easy for me to sit here and say that, but it's really the best advice that you can get is adapt to what the situation calls for.
No, that's great advice. And the thing is, it's one of those things where if someone's forgotten about a death of a close loved one, why make them re-grieve that? Why make them go through that grieving process again? My sisters had come up with a great answer with regard to my mom who had Alzheimer's, and she would often ask about her mother, where's my mom? Or she would ask about her sister. And so my sisters came up with a great answer. Whenever she would ask about her mom, she'd say, oh, she's with Aunt Helen. And when she would ask about her sister Helen, she'd say, oh, she's with Mom, because they had both passed. Okay. And it was a great answer, and it solved and it distracted her from and where she didn't have to grieve a death anymore. It was just, okay, let's move on from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice.
Well, I appreciate everything that you do and how you educate the community throughout the country. And so any last thoughts that you want to give, and then we'll give out your resources again here. Any last thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, one thing with you being an elder law attorney, we always recommend to families, don't take today for granted or tomorrow. Make sure you know what your loved one's wishes are. There's wonderful resources out there like elder law attorneys for advanced directives, power of attorneys, living wills, trust. And, if people can't afford an attorney, there's a wonderful resource. It's a couple dollars called 5 Wishes. That's a wonderful tool. I don't know if you've come across those, Bob.
Sure.
Remarkable resource. And, understand and know what your loved one wants to have done or not have done. When that time may come where they can't share what their wishes are, you'll already know, and it can prevent a lot of, heartache and, tough decisions where, guilt can be involved. And, sometimes one of the children may want this and the other doesn't want something. But if you know what your loved one wants, it takes away all the guesswork.
Yeah, that's good. I'll add to that. In Michigan, at least in most areas, they're going to be covered by some kind of legal services where So in my main office, it's pretty much anybody over age 60 can get some basic legal services, like you mentioned, a patient advocate or a power of attorney. But in probably most areas of Michigan, if they don't have the means to hire a lawyer, they should have access to that. I'm guessing in most areas of the country, they have something like that. So I
Sure.
agree with you 100% that those are important things to do. And if you don't feel like you have the money or resources to do it, it's still important to lay out, what you would want to happen if you can't specify your medical desires anymore, or you're not able to communicate those answers anymore.
Absolutely.
So, Lance, I'm happy that you're out there educating the community. And for those interested, his podcast is All Home Care Matters via YouTube and all the other places you can find podcasts.
Thank you so much, Bob.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe. We're Advice from Your Advocates, and you can find us on any place that you can find podcasts, or you can go to our website at mannorlawgroup.com and go to our podcast link. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, visit mannorlawgroup.com.